Similarities of why Australia entered both World War One and World War Two are: Australia saw it as an opportunity to show allegiance to the motherland, and they saw it as their duty to fight alongside England, as Australia is part of the Commonwealth. The men of Australia also felt pressured to enter the war and saw it as a great opportunity to earn more money. Men saw it as a great chance for adventure, and but also would have been socially disapproved by women, shown a white flower which symbolized being a coward if they did not enlist in the war, and seen as a coward from other men if they did not fight. But each war has slight differences, as in World War One felt it was essential to define themselves as a nation and prove to the world that Australia can stand on their own 2 feet and unify themselves as a strong and independent nation. Australia also saw it as a great way to make Australian history and make a name for the new nation. But Australia entered World War Two as they saw it essential to gather a better reputation after the effects of World War One, and also entered the war as our home front was under threat.
Experiences of soldiers. The main similarities between the two wars were that they both had casualties and death. The Australian soldiers showed the spirit of mateship throughout both wars. The First World War was mainly trench warfare. World War One was mainly composed of stalemate and attrition. Many of the men stayed in the trenches for very long periods of time. The weather during the war was raining most of the time. The trenches had duckboards installed to prevent soldiers from contracting trench foot. For the Australian soldiers, Gallipoli was the highlight of the war. Many soldiers practically walked to their deaths. Although they did this, many of the soldiers pushed forward and helped their mates, showing a true Aussie spirit of mateship. During World War II, there were many advances in technology that changed the way the men battled. This war was composed of guerrilla attacks, never lasting for more than a day. Most of the men had their own machine guns, which allowed them to create greater danger and cause more casualties. With the technology available, the main way to gain advantage over your enemies was to control the sky. There were no trenches used in World War II, although air raid shelters were used to protect people from the bombs dropped from the sky. These were underground and provided good shelter from the explosions. This war was not stalemate like World War One. The men had to walk greater distances and move more quickly. Also, the Australian soldiers that fought in World War II faced a totally different environment. It was more jungle warfare, fought within Southeast Asia. The climate was more tropical.
Involvement of women in the World War. World War One was a crucial time for women. This is because it gave women an opportunity to prove themselves in a male-dominated society, doing more than cleaning the house and caring for the children. With so many men going to war, there was a large gap in employment, and in response, women came in to replace the men. Some of the well-known roles in World War One included nurses, munition factory workers, sewing bandages, and selling war bonds, shipyards, and spies. Women in World War Two was different because they were more experienced, nurses and mechanics. They also had better materials for when they sewed their clothing so it didn't fall apart as much. The difference between World War One was they needed socks for the men to wear, and in World War Two they drove trucks to carry their equipment and to also support the land. In my opinion, I thought the women were very brave to join the men and help them with the things they couldn't do. In today's society, it would be harder to encourage the women to join the men, for they would have seen or heard of the experiences they had and would be too scared.
In World War One, the Defence Act only allowed conscripted men to fight on Australian soil and did not allow them to fight overseas. The only thing that would allow them to fight overseas would be for the Australian government to extend the Defence Act from home service to overseas service. But there was a problem. Some members of the Labour government were against conscription. The Prime Minister, William Hughes, knew that he had enough supporters of conscription among the Labour and Liberal parties to have a majority in the House of Representatives, but he was a few short of a majority in the Senate. To overcome this problem, Hughes decided to hold a national vote on the issue. There were two referendums on the matter. On both occasions, the winning vote said no to conscription. In the first vote, the country was divided 51% to 49%, but the margin was larger in the second vote. In World War II, American conscripts were fighting outside of their home front, so it was unfair as the Australian conscripts were only on home service. As a result, the home front was extended to include New Guinea, as allies of Australia were beginning to defeat Japan and a demand was made on Australian troops slightly further north.